In the 1840s, American mining companies arrived on the shores of Lake Superior, expecting to discover one of the richest copper deposits on Earth. Instead, they discovered something far more unsettling. Long before a single European miner reached the region, someone had already been there. Deep shafts had already been cut into solid rock. Thousands of stone hammers lay abandoned where they had been used. Entire sections of native copper had already been removed, leaving behind an industrial landscape that looked centuries older than anyone expected. The deeper engineers explored these ancient workings. The more difficult one question became to answer: who mined all of this copper? For decades, historians searched for an explanation, but one of the most remarkable answers had already been recorded in 1894. That year, Ojibwe elders described a people who came to Lake Superior for one purpose alone. They knew where the copper was. They extracted it using fire. They carried it to the shoreline. Then they loaded it onto boats and disappeared. For more than a century, that account received surprisingly little attention. Yet today, many of the details preserved in that oral tradition appear to match what archaeologists later uncovered beneath the ground itself. So who were these mysterious miners? And why does one of North America's oldest oral histories seem to remember them long after everyone else forgot? The first people to realize something was wrong were not archaeologists. They were miners. When American mining companies began expanding into Michigan's Upper Peninsula during the 1840s, they were searching for one thing: native copper. Unlike most copper deposits around the world, Lake Superior's copper did not have to be smelted from ore. It existed as nearly pure metal, sometimes in massive lumps weighing hundreds or even thousands of pounds. It was one of the richest and most unusual copper deposits on Earth. The companies expected to be the first people to exploit it. Instead, they found evidence that someone else had arrived thousands of years earlier. As crews stripped away the soil, they repeatedly broke into ancient mine workings. These weren't shallow holes dug by chance. Many were carefully excavated pits cut into solid bedrock. Others extended deep below the surface, supported by timber and designed to follow the copper veins with surprising precision. Thousands of heavy stone hammers were discovered abandoned beside the workings, as though the people using them had simply walked away. The discoveries quickly attracted the attention of government surveyors and geologists. Among them was Charles Whittlesey, one of the first scientists to systematically document the ancient mines. What he described challenged almost every assumption people held about North America's past. These were not isolated digging sites scattered across the landscape. They formed an enormous mining district stretching across Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula and onto Isle Royale, with evidence of organized extraction taking place over a very long period. The more the mines were mapped, the stranger the picture became. This was not the work of people casually collecting pieces of copper from the ground. Someone had followed underground veins with remarkable accuracy. Someone had invested years, perhaps generations, opening new pits, clearing rock, and removing enormous quantities of metal. That raised a question no one at the mines could answer. Who would undertake a project on this scale? Long before modern machinery, long before written history in the region. And for what purpose? At first, many believed archaeology would eventually provide the answer. Instead, every new discovery only made the mystery larger. Because, while the mines clearly showed that vast amounts of copper had been extracted, almost none of that copper could be found nearby. It was as though an entire industry had existed, completed its work, and vanished without leaving behind the civilization responsible. For decades, researchers searched for clues in the ground, but one of the most intriguing clues had never been buried at all. It had been preserved in the memories of the people who had lived beside Lake Superior the longest. For nearly half a century, the ancient mines remained a puzzle. Engineers could measure the shafts. Geologists could map the copper deposits. Archaeologists could recover thousands of stone hammers and wooden tools, but none of them could answer the simplest question: who were the people that built this mining industry? In 1894, an answer came from the people whose homelands surrounded Lake Superior long before modern mining began. Ojibwe elders shared an account that had been preserved through generations of oral tradition. It did not describe mythical beings or supernatural events. It described a people remembered for one reason above all else: they came for the copper. According to the account, these strangers already knew where the richest deposits were located. They didn't wander through the wilderness searching for metal. They arrived with purpose, opened mines where the copper lay closest to the surface and worked them in organized groups. Their goal wasn't to settle the land. Their goal was to extract as much copper as possible. The elders also remembered something remarkably specific. They said the miners used fire to break the rock before removing the copper. After the metal was freed, it was carried to the shoreline, loaded onto large vessels, and transported away across the water. When their work was finished, they simply left. It's an unusually practical story. There are no battles, no lost kingdoms, no supernatural explanations. Just a description of organized miners arriving, extracting copper, and departing. Whether every detail is historically accurate is impossible to know. But what makes the account so fascinating is what happened when archaeologists later examined the mines themselves. They found evidence that ancient miners had indeed used fire to fracture the rock before removing the copper. Burned stone, charcoal, and the distinctive patterns left by heat were all present within the ancient workings. The mining method preserved in Ojibwe memory closely matched what investigators later found underground. That doesn't answer who the miners were, but it does raise an important question. How did an oral tradition recorded in 1894 preserve a mining technique that the excavated evidence would later appear to support? That point of agreement is where this story becomes far more than a mystery about copper. It becomes a mystery about memory itself, because the deeper researchers looked into the mines, the more the ground seemed to echo what the Ojibwe had remembered all along. The more researchers documented the ancient mines, the harder it became to dismiss them as the work of small groups collecting copper for everyday use. These were not scattered holes in the ground. They formed an enormous mining district extending across Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula and onto Isle Royale. Wherever 19th century miners opened new operations, they kept finding evidence that someone had already worked the same copper veins long before them. Then another mystery began to emerge. It wasn't simply that ancient people had mined copper. Archaeologists had known that for years. The real mystery was the scale. Lake Superior contained one of the largest deposits of native copper on Earth, and evidence from the ancient workings suggested that an extraordinary amount of it had been removed over thousands of years. Yet when researchers looked across North America, they found only a relatively small amount of finished copper tools, ornaments, and ceremonial objects, compared with the immense quantity believed to have been extracted. That imbalance has fueled debate ever since. Where did the rest go? The traditional explanation is that the copper was gradually traded across indigenous trade networks over many centuries, repeatedly recycled, lost, or buried in places that have yet to be discovered. Indigenous communities unquestionably mined and worked Lake Superior copper, and that part of the historical record is well established. But for others, the sheer scale of the ancient workings raises additional questions. If mining continued for centuries, who organized it? Who supplied the labor? And who needed so much copper? Those questions become even more intriguing when viewed alongside the Ojibwe account. The elders didn't describe scattered families collecting useful pieces of metal. They remembered organized groups arriving with a clear purpose, working the copper methodically, transporting it to the shoreline, and leaving by water when their work was complete. Whether that tradition preserves an exact historical record or a memory, shaped over generations, remains a matter of interpretation. But one thing is difficult to ignore. The physical evidence and the oral tradition point toward the same place, the same mines, and the same remarkable industry that once operated along the shores of Lake Superior. The next question is the one that has fascinated historians, archaeologists, and independent researchers for generations. If so much copper left these mines, where was it ultimately destined to go?
For more than a century, one question has overshadowed every other. If so much copper was removed from the Lake Superior mines, where did it go? It's a simple question, but the answer has divided researchers ever since. One possibility is that the copper never left North America in the enormous quantities some have suggested. Many archaeologists argue that it was gradually traded between indigenous communities over thousands of years, repeatedly reused, recycled, or lost to time. Given enough centuries, even large amounts of metal can disappear into countless small objects scattered across an entire continent. That remains the mainstream explanation. Others believe the evidence points in another direction. They note that during roughly the same period, civilizations across Europe and the Mediterranean were entering the Bronze Age, a time when copper became one of the most valuable resources in the world. Bronze could not exist without it. and demand for the metal grew rapidly as tools, weapons, and trade expanded across the ancient world. That observation has led some researchers to ask a bold question. Could at least some of Lake Superior's copper have reached the Old World? In recent years, scientific studies comparing the chemical signatures of ancient copper have fueled that discussion. Some analyses have been interpreted as being consistent with Lake Superior copper, while other researchers disagree and argue that the evidence is not conclusive. The debate remains active, and no single explanation has been universally accepted. Yet regardless of where someone stands on that debate, the Ojibwe account becomes difficult to ignore. Long before isotope analysis, long before modern archaeology, the elders preserved a remarkably simple memory. A people arrived, they came for the copper, they carried it to the water, and they left. Whether those boats crossed only the Great Lakes, or something much farther, is a question history has yet to answer. Perhaps that's why this story continues to fascinate so many people, because it doesn't ask us to believe in the impossible. It asks us to explain something that is undeniably real. The mines exist, the stone hammers exist, the ancient shafts exist, and the Ojibwe memory was written down in 1894, long before this mystery reached modern audiences. Maybe the greatest mystery isn't whether the copper was mined, it's whether we've been asking the wrong question all along. Instead of asking who mined the copper, perhaps we should be asking who was waiting to receive it. More than 180 years have passed since American mining companies first uncovered those ancient workings along the shores of Lake Superior. In all that time, the physical evidence has never disappeared. The stone hammers are still preserved in museums. The abandoned mine pits can still be visited. The charred rock left behind by ancient fire setting can still be examined. The timber recovered from some of the shafts has been dated, confirming that people were extracting copper there thousands of years before European settlers reached the region. None of those discoveries are controversial. They are part of the historical record. What remains controversial is everything that follows. Who organized such an enormous mining operation? How was so much copper transported? And why does the archaeological record preserve only a small fraction of the metal believed to have been removed? The Ojibwe never claimed to answer every one of those questions. Their tradition preserved something much simpler. They remembered that another people had once come to Lake Superior. They remembered why they came. They remembered how they mined the copper. And they remembered that, one day, they loaded what they had taken onto boats and disappeared. Whether that memory describes events exactly as they happened thousands of years ago is something historians will continue to debate. Oral traditions naturally change over long periods of time, and archaeology rarely provides complete answers. But what makes this account remarkable is not that it solves every mystery. It's that it preserves details which seem to echo what was later uncovered beneath the ground. Sometimes history survives in books, sometimes it survives in ruins, and sometimes it survives because generation after generation refuses to forget. Perhaps that's why the 1894 account continues to attract so much attention today. Not because it proves an extraordinary theory, but because it reminds us that the people who lived closest to a place often remembered things long before archaeologists began digging there. The ancient mines of Lake Superior still exist. The questions they raised in the 19th century remain largely unanswered, and somewhere between the stone hammers left beside abandoned shafts and the words spoken by Ojibwe elders more than a century ago, one of North America's greatest historical mysteries is still waiting to be fully understood. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy exploring forgotten history, ancient engineering, and the mysteries that continue to challenge what we think we know about the past, consider subscribing. There are still many remarkable stories hidden in old records, forgotten landscapes and oral traditions, stories that deserve to be remembered. Until next time, thank you for watching.